Hey, here we are. We
Yeah,
are in week 2 of the Mosaic series, and happy Monday. This is Monday that we're
indeed.
thinking, and I know Mondays are an interesting day for me, often coming down from preaching and just kind of taking in what happened. And
Mhm.
so I don't know, just give us a little bit of insight. Like, what do you feel kind of on a Monday after you deliver a word like the one that came through yesterday?
Relief. Honestly,
Yeah.
this message was probably the hardest message that I have ever prepared. I mean, if you were to count like the hours that I put in, you could take the previous two sermons, combine them together, and I still don't think it reached the same amount of
Wow.
hours I turmoiled over this message. I mean, we were talking about it numerous times throughout the
We were
week.
texting, so everyone we were texting about 11:30 on Saturday.
Yeah.
You're like, it is finished. I'm like, all right, there
Yes.
it is. So yeah, but it was big, and I think we could feel it. And I know for everyone that isn't fully aware, I guess to go behind the curtain, we have this preaching team, and you're a key part of helping us lead and shape and organize that. And you and I have been connecting on messages for for a decade, if you could believe it,
Yeah.
to kind of prepare our hearts around how the preaching's going to happen here, even when you played different roles on our team. But to really see the preaching team formalize and us come together every single week, we meet on Tuesdays and we really kind of travail and dig into the text and
Yep.
begin to get a deep sense of what is the Lord speaking so that we can bring all that together and then begin to write the one who's going to deliver that message. And I know we could feel something special this past
Oh, yeah.
week. We just had a deep sense of this is going to be a word.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody had a really strong sense, and we really coalesced around this message. Some weeks it's just kind of just grinding and just shuffling through and just trying to get sense out of it, and then in the end maybe we get like an idea or concept. This one it was almost an embarrassment of riches, and I mean maybe 30 or 40% of what we talked about made it into the
Yeah.
message, and there's just so much that we could have dove deeper into or explored more. It was really it was incredible, but it was also daunting because there was all of this content and all of this information. So it's how do you bring all these ideas together and then deliver something that helps people take a next step with Jesus? And that's for me the big challenge in putting it all together.
Yeah, and I love this Mosaic series that we're in, and as we're going through this journey, we are really trying to get clarity on who Jesus is, and we're getting this greater picture. And so, as we've talked about, Sundays in the message, that sermon is a sense of this massive introduction to this kind of meta theme of who Jesus is and who
Yep.
all these prophecies come together and ultimately show us. And so King of Kings, that's it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's the King of Kings, the authority, the power of who Jesus is and
Yep.
what that represents. And when we begin to hold that against our current reality, there's man, I think we're living in a day and age right now where I believe that people have never been more disillusioned with leaders.
Oh, come on.
They've never been more kind of unbelieving in them. That even the best leaders that we have and we hold up in today, we know that somewhere they're not telling the truth.
Yep.
Somewhere they're going to let us down. Somewhere they have a shortcoming.
Yeah.
And we need to get a fresh revelation that there is a leader worthy of following
Amen.
with everything we have, who will never leave us, never fail us,
Yeah.
never forsake us,
Yeah.
never have a scandal, never fall apart, never make a wrong choice. I mean,
Yeah.
we have a leader in Jesus, who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords and worthy of everything. And I mean, so when you say it felt daunting, yeah. So let's just capture that in 30 minutes
Yeah.
and help the people get all these other leaders off the thrones of their hearts
Yep.
and into him. So I mean, it was a lot. I know it was a lot to wrap your heart around.
Yeah, it was so much, and trying to catch people up into this grand vision of it is super challenging, but it's also super exciting because you really get to give this real triumphalistic message that Jesus is on the throne, that he sees farther, that he is capable, that he has overcome, and you get to do all that, but then in the midst of that, you've got to challenge some things in people's lives and hearts. And so, yeah, sure, I could have got up there and just gave this really high and fun message, but I think there's something deeper that our people would appreciate more. And that deeper is to really say, hey, are you truly following the King of Kings? And are you really allowing your life to be shaped by the course of the King? Because how many of our lives are being shaped by so many other things?
Yeah, I think that's what we really stumbled into so quickly as well. Is I think I liked how you said it in the message on a few of the occasions you talked about the kings and the things.
Yes.
And that's something we kind of came upon as we were talking
Yeah.
with the pastors, is that what kind of ultimately occupies when we talk about the throne of our hearts, just so we're all clear on that, we're talking about that place that it says guard your heart above all else, because out of that everything in your life
Yeah.
flows. And when our heart is there, that's where our treasure is. That's where our greatest, it's a seat of
Yep.
affection. When we talk about the throne, and when that deep longing of our heart is
Mm.
for something other than Jesus, it's being led
Yeah, yeah.
by something other than Jesus. And what's scary is I think that we all don't realize, and
Mm.
people don't realize, I don't realize, you don't always realize how easily our heart is being influenced by so
Mm.
many
Mm.
other things and so many other people
Yeah.
or dreams or whatever it might be. And I just loved how you just kept bringing us back to Jesus, that our life has to be built on Jesus. Our hearts have to see Jesus as the Lord of all, as the King of Kings, as the ultimate leader. So it's something. I think it conflicts with our present time that we're living in, where
Mm.
it's like, can we trust our leaders? Can we trust people in high level of influence and leadership? And where people are living in more and more disillusionment
Yep.
about that. We can't be disillusioned about Jesus.
No.
He's worthy of it all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Man, for me, it just brings so many thoughts to my mind about where people are at in their spiritual journeys and the level of trust that they have for Jesus to kind of carry them through situations. I think people are willing to trust Jesus in the big things. Like they're willing to say yes to salvation. They're willing to say to some degree yes to the church, but there's definitely a level to which that diminishes. Why? Because I'm not willing to trust the leaders in my life that Jesus has put there in authority. Like, okay, so Jesus, I'm not willing to trust you at that level. And then, I'm not willing to trust other people to be in relationship with them. So I just want to do this all by myself because we live in this whole DIY culture. And so, like, there's all these layers in which we only trust ourselves, but when we take a look in the mirror, we actually don't trust ourselves.
Yep.
Like, in so many ways do we have all these doubts, all these fears, all these insecurities, but yet when it comes down to it, we're like, oh, well, it's just really all about me and just me being on the throne of my own heart. And to me, that's just really sad when we reflect on that, because what did Jesus come to do? He came to offer us another way. And the greatest thing that we're called to do is cast our cares upon him. Why? Because he cares for us. We're supposed to take off the yoke of the world and place it on him and pick up his yoke so we can learn how to walk from him. Why? Because his yoke is easy, his burden is light, and he wants to give us rest for our souls. Yeah. But we don't want to receive that rest because we're too busy carrying all the things, and we're too busy trying to please all the kings in our lives that we miss what Jesus ultimately wants to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's powerful. And you started to hit on something. So, we can say, many people can say yes to Jesus, and you've seen that. People that
Yeah.
get broken and hurt in church context and deal with that, they'll say, I love your Jesus, but it's
Yeah.
his followers, it's
Yep.
the church, it's the people. That's what gets in the way of that. And often when we get into relationship with each other, and the closer we get to people, the more we realize we're not perfect. Even
Yeah.
leaders and people that you get into relationship with, there's that opportunity. We are living in quite a interesting dynamic where in the social media driven culture that we're in right now, we have leaders that are getting propped up in what we would call influencers.
Yep.
And they are literally curating their lives in such a way that they only show you the best clips, and they
Yep.
keep you at an arm's, I mean, you're so far from them, you're so far removed.
Yeah.
But the way that we post and the way that we share, we give selective insight into these inner places. So you kind of feel closer than you really are. And so you hold that up against when you actually get into messy relationship with people. You get the good, bad, and the ugly. That's what family does.
Yeah.
And so we have this place where many people are being more influenced by these kind of long distance social media driven relationships and the leaders and the influences that we follow, even on social media. And we let that begin to shape our lives. And we want to move away from relationship and going
Yep.
deeper into community with people, because we are being conditioned to believe that, man, like, everyone else's life is perfect. Like, everyone else is just putting the best of clips of their life,
Yep.
of what they are, of how they're living, and the damage that that's doing. I'm not just talking, I mean, it's ravaging our up and coming generations. I mean, children and my children, they're growing up in a day and age where they know nothing but this.
Yep.
Teenagers have like kind of known nothing but this, but it's messing with adults. It's messing with parents, because we all have that keeping up with the Joneses, keeping up
Yep.
with the whoever. And it just, it wreaks havoc on us,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you talk about all that. Some of my favorite social media posts are actually the people who show you what the pose was that they sent out in social media, and then they show you what it looks like while they were trying to set it up, because that authenticity really goes a long way. It's like, yes, I am trying to say I am this perfect person, but really I'm not this perfect person. So let me show you that the emperor does have no clothes, and then this is what it ultimately looks like. But there is this this facade that people want to create, and so they curate only what they show you, and they're only going to show you the best. I like to post a lot of the food that I make. I don't show you any of my failures online. Why? Because it's silly to show you my failures. You want to see the successes. You want to see the clean and perfect plates and all that kind of stuff. And so social media sets itself up for these curated experiences, because the better it looks, the more likes I'm going to get, the more follows I'm going to get, and then inside of that, then I just find myself just hungering and feeding after all of that, because it feeds something in me that, oh, I'm somehow important, or something like that. But really, that's not what it's all about. I shouldn't be wanting to feed that thing that's within me. Rather, I should be repressing that thing within me that wants all that accolades, all those followers, all of that, just esteem. It's just something that I need to push down. Why? Because God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And so how do I lead with humility, or how does anyone really lead with humility through in an age when we're only called to put our best forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been challenged by that. So I've been, if anyone's kind of followed me, I'm pretty like neutral and like disconnected on social media. But for this series, I've kind of re-engaged. And so I kind of stumble upon having a bunch of people that are connected to me on Instagram, and I had no idea. So I actually created another. So you might turn 2 or 3 Instagram accounts for me, because I didn't know what I was doing. I kept making new ones. But I have that. But I've just started to get the why for me. My why is I just want to be able to connect with our body and our people, and just have some better kind of way of doing that. And also, as I'm engaging in God's word, I just want to kind of share in that, and like just kind of figure out what that can look like a little bit more. And so it's how you steward that space. I've seen a few people, even in our body, and maybe we'll get to a point of talking to some of them at some point, because that's a call out to some of you. Maybe I'm going to have a conversation with you. Cool. But I've seen them stewarding their kind of presence online, and they begin to realize that, like, the reason I'm going to use any influence that I have is I just want to point people to Jesus. That's the best thing we can do with our effort, with our energy. I've seen some moms that are being really vulnerable, sharing the good and the difficult, and then starting to kind of lay out, hey, this is a tense thing, and this is what I'm putting in front, and here's this Bible I got from my kid. Like, that's some cool stuff, because other parents are asking questions, feeling super alone, like they don't have it all figured out. Yeah, I mean, as we're stumbling, we're kind of like circling social media. I didn't know that we go in this direction today here, and it's not that we're anti any of it, but we have to realize that social media is like the kingmaker of our day. Yeah. Like, it really is. Like, you used to have these noblemen and these people back in hundreds of years ago. They would be the one that kind of set the king. Like, they were the one that kind of, if you can get in favor with them, they could make the king who they wanted the king to be. And I think social media does that now, because it's just platforms that are created, and they're all built on the idea of followers. And those followers create influence, and those influencers create the algorithms, or whatever the kind of feed that we're getting. I think you said this in one of the messages, might have been the 11 o'clock, that, it's setting up, or it might have been a conversation that we had, that based on who you're following creates your feed. So talk about that for a moment.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just something that the algorithm is always looking at what you like, and what people the things that you like, what those people also like, if they like them. So if you like the same thing as me, and I like the same thing, and so we like that same thing together, then what happens is it starts showing us other things that we like together, because they're like, well, if you like this and I like this, then perhaps you guys will like other similar things. And so the feed's always trying to just say, hey, how can I show you things that you're going to like, or things that you could be interested, because it wants to get you in this infinite loop of keep scrolling. And I mean, how many of us have fallen to what I like to call a scroll hole, where I'm just like walking along and I just scroll, and then before you know it, I fell into a hole where I just spent 25, 30 minutes of my time just literally allowing this infinite loop to just take place on my phone. And then, but that feed is only going to be things that I'm interested in, because if I just get things that you're just interested in, well, then I'm just going to stop following just right away. And so everybody has a different feed, and just like everybody's Netflix is different, everybody's YouTube page is different, everybody's Instagram is different, everybody's Facebook, and it's all based upon who you're following and what you're interested in.
Oh, yeah. So this is going to preach. You ready for this?
Go.
What's feeding your feed?
Oh, come on.
Who's feeding your feed?
Yes.
Who's putting that out there? And I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves. Like, quite honestly, I love one of the most powerful things that you said in the message, and I heard the response from our body was, man, for us to more fully follow Jesus, there's some people that we have to unfollow.
Yes.
And that preached, because it really is. And I'm talking, like, I was convicted enough that as I was scrolling myself on social media, instead of pushing aside the things that weren't as interesting to me, or the things that I'm like, I don't really need that, I started to click unfollow. I
Yep.
just started to literally put that into practice. And so I think that'd be a great thing for some of us to realize that
Yes.
there are some things that are having influence. There's some things that we used to follow, we used to be
Yeah.
about, that before we were saying Jesus is king of our lives, we want to follow Jesus. And that stuff, the ghosts of that, the residue of that,
Yeah.
because we're still connected in community with people that care about
Yeah.
those things, that stuff can still kind of creep right into the feed. Some of it, yeah, push it aside, turn a blind eye to it. Some of us, we need to get a little more involved in saying, I'm going to change the feed.
Yeah.
I want the things that are kind of coming
Yep.
my way. If I am going to be on social media, I want to be fed with the right things.
Ooh,
I want to receive that. Man, I don't know, man. We're about to create a little message here on social media. The feed is what feeds us.
Yes,
It's feeding
indeed.
some people, man. They're eating from that, whatever it is that's coming through. So what are we consuming? Because what we're consuming ultimately feeds our heart. And out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yep.
And what
That's
flows
it.
out of our life is ultimately what we're allowing ourselves to feed on. So
Come on.
I love being in the devotionals
I
every
love it.
morning. I love,
Yeah.
I was able to just share with my assistant here on the team, yesterday's devotion. It was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it was day 7 yesterday, and I hope that she doesn't mind me sharing this, but she was saying that, her and her husband were talking about like looking for a sign. Like, she was like, this happened and this was the sign that was needed. And I was like, hey, look at this devotion.
Oh, come
Remember
on.
the reflection from day 7? It was like, what sign does someone need? I said, when were you feeling that? She's like, I was feeling it yesterday. I was like, you got the sign. It's exactly what we prayed for. We were praying, Lord, we need a sign that you're with us, that you're leading us, that you're in control of all this.
Amen.
So I love having those times, but that's what's feeding me.
Yeah.
What's feeding me? Is the word of God feeding
Amen.
you, or is the opinions of people feeding
Yep.
you? What is it that ultimately is shaping the way we're living our lives? And it's got to be shaped by the King.
Yep.
We get his word, we get his authority, we get his power, we get his presence.
Yep.
I mean, if that begins to feed us, it changes everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I said it in the sermon. I'll say it again. I mean, the course of our lives are shaped by our kings. And so if we put God and his word and the people who give godly counsel as the thing that's feeding our soul, then the course of our life is going to be shaped around the narrow road rather than the broad road that leads to destruction. Because so much of this world wants to just take you in so many different directions, the direction that you're interested in. But where's Jesus want to lead you? He wants to lead you closer to him, closer to faithfulness to God. Literally, the word Torah means the way, right? Because there's a way that you and I are called to walk in. And if we're not walking in that way, then what's going to happen? Then we're going to get off the way. And when we get off the way, we're going towards the road that leads to destruction. So if we want to experience the life and the abundant life that Jesus has for us, then we need to allow his word to sink deep into our souls. Like Jesus says, you're truly my disciples if you abide in my word. And so if we spend that time being fed by his word, being fed by his presence, being fed by the community of believers that are passionately pursuing Jesus, it's going to change and shape who we truly are.
I think that's really good. Part of the reason we're doing what we're doing with this podcast, our big why is we want to help people live a changed life.
Amen.
We want to help people more deeply live that changed life. And I know that not everything that we feel convicted and convinced needs to be delivered to the hearts of God's people can always come through in a Sunday morning. Because we have a very large and very mixed crowd. We have people that are not yet with Jesus. We have people that are just starting a relationship with Jesus. And then we have people that have been with Jesus longer than we've been alive. We have some people who have been with Jesus longer than we both, if you combine both of our ages, they've been walking with Jesus longer than we've both been alive collectively. And so you have people all over the place. And I mean, you know this, and maybe we could talk about it more in another episode. But John 6 has been so shaping to me in my own journey with the Lord, especially coming through the sabbatical season. Because as I read John 6, you kind of see all these different audiences that Jesus is interacting with, the community, the crowds of people. But then we have the congregation, and that's the people that assembled. And among that are people that are not yet following Jesus, and those that are committed, and his core. So you have all those. You have the congregation. Inside the congregation, some are his followers. That'd be the committed. Then you have the core, which are the 12. And when Jesus is speaking, he has a message for the crowd. And then he has a message for the congregation, which is like, I'm the bread of life. Then he has a message for the committed, eat my flesh, drink my blood. Then he has a message for the core, not all of you are even really following me, and you think you are. You're going to leave me. And so I think in this podcast and in this desire for us is that we want to kind of take it one layer deeper and just come, if we could just talk to the committed, if we could just talk to a follower of Jesus today, it's saying, I want to do my very best to follow him. and we can think about this message. Is there anything you left out of the notes? Anything you're like, I didn't get to hit that? If I could just say, I'm having a conversation with somebody that's saying, I want to follow Jesus with everything I have, and you can just challenge them today. What is that challenge that you feel like comes from this message?
It came up when we were in the preaching team, and we were talking about this passage in Joshua, and this was super powerful, that Joshua is about to go and do the circling around Jericho. And so they circle around one time for 6 days, and on the seventh they circle around 7 times, and then the walls fall. Well, prior to that circling, he runs into this individual, and then he says, hey, are you for their side or are you for our side? And then he says, neither. I'm actually for the Lord, the host of heaven's army side. And then it's like, well, wait a minute. I thought Israel are like the people of God. I thought they're the ones who are in control of this moment and that heaven would be with them. And he's like, no. Well, here's the issue. So often in our lives, we're looking for Jesus to take sides. But here's the thing, he came to take over. And ultimately what Jesus wants to do is he invites us into a journey to follow him. But many of us, when we begin that journey, we're like, come, Jesus, and follow me in my life. And then I'll just have you as like my little co-pilot. And then you can inform all my decisions, but I'm the one driving the ship. And Jesus is like, no, listen, here's the order. It's me and then it's you. And when you're willing to surrender and follow me as Lord, it's going to change everything. And you look in Jesus's ministry, what happens? There's this moment where one person says, Lord, I'm going to follow you. And then Jesus is like, listen, birds have nests and foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Then another person's like, well, let me go bury my father. And then Jesus says, listen, let the dead bury their own dead. And then his disciples get in the boat and they follow him out into the water. This is a tie back to last week, actually. And what happened? They go into a storm. And so sometimes you're going to follow Jesus into a storm, but that's not even the only. There's a time that Luke records and says that another said, listen, let me come and follow you, but first I need to say goodbye to my family. And then Jesus says, listen, the person who set their hands at the plow isn't fit to turn their head back, right? You just got to keep pursuing after the kingdom. And then what does Jesus do? He sends the 70 out on the mission to go preach the kingdom. So here's the thing. If you're too busy carrying the things and worried about pleasing the kings of this world, then what's going to happen? You're going to miss your opportunity to preach and to deliver and carry everything that Jesus wants you to carry. So that for me is what I would have shared with everyone had I had more time.
Okay. Well, I mean, just to bring it succincly, I love when we were talking about that. I didn't come to take sides. I came to take over. And we know that's going to preach, and that's going to make it into a message pretty soon.
Indeed.
In fact, there's probably some more. We'll hit it on another time. But, Jesus, that's what they continue to want to do with Jesus. I mean, all the questioning that came from all the religious leaders and all the people that came, when they asked him questions, they were often trying to figure out whose side are you on? What kind of Jew are you?
Yep.
Are you with the Herodians? Are you with the Zealots? Are you with the Pharisees? Are you with what Jew are you, Jesus? And he's like, I didn't come to take sides. I came to take over. I didn't come. The kingdom that you're kind of imagining right now is not my kingdom. I've come to bring on another kingdom. It's not just another version 3.0 or version 5.0. Like we're going to have, the good old days. No, I've come to bring an eternal kingdom. I am the King of Kings. And they couldn't grasp that. They couldn't get their hearts and minds around it. And guess what? 2,000 years have passed. We still can't get our minds around it. We still are living in places, man, where we find our hope is going to come if a politician can get elected, or if a certain leader is getting to a certain place, if a certain outcome happens in our lives, if a certain thing with my job goes the right way, if I find the right person, marry the right person, then I'll have peace. No, we will never have peace until the King of Kings is on his throne. Then it will never end, and his peace will be present, and it will come, and it will rest on us in ways that we can never imagine. So I'm lit up, man. I'm lit up about this message. I'm lit up about this theme. I'm just excited that this week we get to dig in. I know right now, just kind of coming through this and, today meditating on his word, and every day that I'm feeding myself with this, and I'm getting a greater revelation of what it means that Jesus is King of Kings in my life, as I worship him, as I know he's just worthy. I love right now our worship leaders and our Ben is leading all of our teams through a book called How to Worship a King. I wish I had a copy of that, but I mean, we'll throw that in the show notes. I know we keep saying we're going to throw stuff in the show notes and it never ends up there. So we promise this week it'll be in the show notes.
Oh, good.
But we'll put How to Worship a King if anyone wants to pick that up. I think it's by Zach Neese, who's a great worship pastor down at Gateway Church, down in Dallas, Texas, and just how to worship a king, how to understand that everything we do, we're doing for the King, And when we live our lives, I was at a time when it couple weeks ago. I'm just looking at my notes here from, I got to go away and be with some pastors and got to hear John Maxwell speak. And anytime I get to get into a room with him, he's an incredible leader. He talked about the church's role in culture. And in that talk, he said the first thing, we represent the king. We stand in his authority. And I was like, there it is, man. That's what it's about. We speak prophetically to the culture around us because we're speaking on behalf of a king. You know, we get to speak his word out because he's made us ambassadors.
Yep, exactly.
We're
That's where I was going to go
We're
with that.
witnesses. Yeah. Well, hey, look at me, man. I'm learning from you. So I think it's powerful. Now, one other thing that really hit me, and I kept saying it. So there's leaders in our house and staff, and you saw me continually repeating it because I believed it, is that this was a message of spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
This was, I really believe, a word that as it came forward, it was the embodiment of what God's word says. We don't struggle against flesh and blood. And I think part of the reason that you were probably feeling the tension you were feeling is because it was a spiritual tension. These are not just words. This was calling out some counterfeit kings who have been masquerading and who have been having a grand old time, just leading people's lives. And I'm like, man, we're about to deliver a message that a few thousand people are going to hear.
Yep.
And as they hear that, they're going to have to confront and see, hold on, maybe there's a false king here. And it says our battle and struggle isn't against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and rulers in the unseen world, in the unseen realm. And man, I'm just telling you, that word was putting them on notice. And so I know that struggle was there, but I mean, as you're considering that layer of it, I mean, what do you think as you kind of consider a message of preaching being spiritual warfare?
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, anytime we're preaching, it's really spiritual warfare because we're talking to people that are in darkness, right? And then we're inviting them to take off the chains and actually stop being a slave to sin and enter into the freedom that only comes from being a follower of the Son, and then experiencing what Jesus says, whom the Son sets free is free indeed, and enter into the kingdom of the Son, the kingdom of light. And so that move from darkness to light, that's spiritual warfare. But for those of us that have moved from darkness to light, here's the issue. Sometimes we go wandering back into the darkness, or we start giving the enemy a place in our life. In Ephesians, it talks about this passage that we like to quote to each other, right? And don't let anger control you. So don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. And we give that in marriage counseling and all those kind of things and friendships. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Why? Because it gives a foothold to the devil. Well, the word there in the original language is it gives a place. And so what you're doing is you're giving, every time that we enter into sin, every time that we give into the things of this world, every time that we start following a counterfeit king, you know what we're doing? We're giving the enemy a seat at our table. We're giving him a place in our heart, a place that was ultimately for Jesus rather than for the enemy. And so when we start to reject these things, what are we doing? We're taking away the enemy's place, and he doesn't want to give up any ground. He ultimately wants his seat. And so when we start confronting those things, the enemy just is like, yo, I want to dig its claws in and say, I want to stay in this spot, because why would the enemy want to give any ground? I mean, in the kingdom, there's a war between these two kingdoms, but Jesus ultimately overcomes because he's the one who sets us free.
I think that's amazing. And as you say that, it's just triggering another book. So we're going to get two books in the show.
Nice.
They're getting 2 for 1. We're making up for lost ground. There is a book by Louie Giglio. It's an awesome book, and it's called Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table.
Come on.
And so it says in Psalm 23 that you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies.
Yes.
And what he goes on to say, basically, some of us, that's what the Good Shepherd does. Jesus has seated us in a place where the enemy is around us. Those things have happened. He's prepared a table for us, but we have now given a seat. We've set up a placemat. We've allowed the enemy to pull up a chair right next to us. He didn't give us a seat with our enemy. He gave us a seat in the presence.
Wow.
And so don't give the enemy a seat at your table. So, I mean, I would just encourage anyone that's saying, maybe I'm embracing some mindsets and some things that I've actually kind of invited that in. I think it'll be a really life-giving word, and kind of just way to dig deeper as well as we kind of consider it. I mean, this is quite a season that we're in, and I can feel the favor of the Lord kind of on us as we're seeing it. One of the things, so we talk always about things that we're excited and we're really feeling really satisfied about. One of the things that I was not quite as satisfied about, and I know you weren't as well, was that as we deliver a word like that, and we're like, come on up to this altar, let's respond to this word. man, it was like very evident how powerful the word was and how few people wanted to get out of their seats and move
Yeah.
forward. And I know that as you were talking to one of your leaders, you're like, hey, what was going on with that? I mean, people were having altar calls in their seats. It was
Yeah,
very
that's what he
evident.
said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we were having that. But I think it's so important that we just take a moment to kind of think about why it's so important for us to get to an altar and
Yeah.
the power of altar in our lives. And for me, all my significant moments in my walk with the Lord, my calling, my salvation, being filled with the Spirit, there were so many moments, and it didn't just happen in my seat. God can meet me anywhere.
Yeah.
But it happened when I stepped out, because it was me making a repositioning of myself, even my whole body, saying, Lord, I'm coming into your presence. I'm coming before you. Nothing magical happens at an altar, but there is something powerful that happens when I begin to move myself in such a way to say, I want to change my position, change my perspective. I want to respond with my whole self to what you're doing in this moment. And so for me, I want to continue to condition us to a place where we can get to altars, to places where we are communing with the Lord, where we are just pushing aside everything else and everyone else and saying, I want to just be alone in the Lord's presence. I love our Wednesday nights. We're getting
Yeah.
to points now where we're like, hey, let's get up here before the altar and just spend some time with the Lord. People just come right out of their seats. I was speaking at a church recently in the middle of the worship time. They began to call an altar, and he just
Yeah.
like, come on up to this altar. And I watched about 80% of the church go forward,
Oh,
and they're
wow.
just up at the altar. And I then shared, and guess what, man, like we had about as many, it was a church of 150 people. I might have had as many people at that altar than I normally do, and we have
Wow.
750 in the room, because they've just become more and more clear that they just want to get into the presence of God and meet with Him. And it's nothing
Yeah.
about where we're at in our seat and we can't feel the Lord's presence. I just believe that significant moments happen when we
Yep.
just reposition ourselves and we get
Ooh.
into that practice, of what that looks like. Go on, you felt something. What are you
Well,
feeling?
yeah, I mean, the whole idea, the significant moments happen when we reposition ourselves. And I just go back to this moment in the Gospels when after the large catch of fish, where Peter and James and John are there, Andrew are there, and then what happens is they have this giant catch, and then Jesus says to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be fishing people. And as soon as they landed, they left everything and they followed Jesus. There was movement in their lives. That event was so significant that they decided, you know what? I'm going to leave behind my things, and then I'm going to come forward and follow Jesus. And there are these moments where we've just got to leave and move so that way we can symbolically say in our hearts, I'm going to go to this next place where Jesus has for me. And that requires some movement in my heart and with my body, because the Christian life is not just a life of the mind or a life of the heart. It's a life that's lived. I mean, worship is all about how we live our lives. One of the things that I like to say often about the Torah, right? So when you're walking through Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, you get caught up in all these kind of rules and these laws. Why is it important about the garments that you wear, and why is it important about how you sow your seed? Because all of life is worship to God. And here Jesus says, the way that you live before me, the way that you act, the way that you behave, how you have your relationships with people, all of that is worship. And we need to live that out and embody that truth and that message so that we can experience the fullness that Jesus has for us.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I mean, we talk about this as well, is that I think there's just three things that start to move our lives forward and help us go deeper into a changed life. These are what I would call like the three things that create a catalyst for a changed life. First, it's an experience.
Yep.
There's an experience in God's presence. There's an experience in the Word. There's an experience with Jesus. You see it in all the Gospels.
Yep.
That drives to a revelation. Something is revealed now through that experience. There's a revelation. My eyes have become open to something. And then the third thing is a conviction. Conviction means and conviction is not bad. I said this in a prayer meeting recently. We often think of conviction as a bad thing, as a way of feeling shame or feeling guilt. No, conviction is different. It literally means my heart has become convinced. I'm becoming convinced of something.
Yeah.
There's a draw that it's convincing something is right or something is not right. And so the more convinced and convicted I become, that's meant to move me. It means that literally we're moved. Like Jesus, whenever he was seeing the crowds of people, like sheep without a shepherd, says he was moved with
Yes.
compassion. There was a deep conviction that welled up in his gut, in his spirit. It literally is like that whole language. I know you can give it better. It's like a very upset stomach, like a pain within. And that conviction is not a bad thing. It's a God thing.
Yep.
And I even say, like, it's scary when God is wanting to meet us and we're not feeling it anymore. When that conviction comes, it means that we're meant to move.
Yep.
And I just think it's healthy, man, and move. Like, literally do what you need to do. I mean, Peter, whenever that great catch of fish happened, he fell in the presence of Jesus.
Yes.
He fell at his
Yes, he
feet.
does.
He changed his posture because he was getting a new perspective on who he was. So I do think that just the way we are continually posturing ourselves is important. I'm not trying to get into
So when we have a new perspective, we need to change our posture.
Yeah, that's it.
So
man.
when that revelation comes to our heart, then what we need to do is respond in that moment.
Yep.
And then that might mean coming forward in that moment. That might mean hitting our knees. That might mean raising our hands. That might mean giving a shout. Whatever it is, we've got to respond with a new posture.
Yeah, and as we respond, that's what then begins to change us, because now we begin to live, hopefully walk differently on the other side of it, And man, I'm just excited for it. I think we're in a moment right now. I think as we are continually getting greater revelations of who Jesus is, as we can really see, it's undeniable how the Lord is kind of working in our midst right now, collectively, across our locations, among our deaf church. I was so overjoyed last Sunday when we preached the God with us that there were every single person present in our deaf location came to the altar. Every single person responded to that word. We had this amazing amount of young people that were responding to the word. Why? Because they were feeling something, and there was this open invitation. Let's come into the presence of the Lord. That's why I'm so excited. If we're going to give a plug, hey, today's episode is sponsored by Open Heaven on March 3rd, because it is going to be our moment. It is our moment of just being in God's presence together, and there is no timetable to when we begin that or end that. We can just encounter. And I watched on that last night where we had some young people and they were up at an altar, man, and I was just seeing they were not going anywhere, and they were encountering the presence of the Lord. And guess what? As we left that place, there was such joy. There was such a deep sense that we have met with the Lord, and I just can't wait for that. We had almost 550. I think you probably estimated through there.
Yeah.
I'm just excited to see what's going to happen this upcoming Sunday night at our Open Heaven night.
We had so many baptisms. I think about a dozen baptisms.
Yep.
I mean, it was just incredible. People were taking all these next steps into the presence of the Lord, and coming up to the altar, lifting and raising their hands, shouting and joy and baptism. I mean, it was just it was an incredible moment. And I think when we have those moments where people can have those experiences, where they experience those revelations, it can lead to these transformative moments. And if we allow ourselves to respond rightly in those moments, God's going to change everything. And the altar is one of the key places where we do that. Why? Because the altar is where things go to die, but it's also where we go to encounter the Lord. I mean, when people were going to the altar, what were they doing? They were encountering the Lord, bringing their sacrifice and saying, God, here's the place where I want to meet you, and I want to encounter you in a real way.
Yeah, and so, the Bible says, and I guess we can kind of wrap it up here. Yeah. It says, let us approach the throne of grace with confidence.
Come on.
So that we can find help and receive mercy to help us in our time of need. What's the throne of grace? It's the altar. It's the place of worship. It's that place of coming before God's presence. And so this is all very connected, even in the imagery of the Old Testament, that we come to the throne. Like we're coming, not the heavenly throne, we're coming to that place of just needing God, just saying, Lord, I'm just here to be in your presence. And so, it's a place of our heart before it's anything else. And I would just encourage anyone that's feeling convicted, you do not have to wait to get to this church and into one of our locations to get to the altar. You get to the altar right where you are. You are the living sacrifice. Put yourself before God right where you are. You can kind of make an altar in the Lord's presence. Say, Lord, here am I, search me. Here am I, change me. Here am I. But change your posture, change your position, get alone with the Lord. I know I had like a prayer closet when I was in college, and that was like that place for just me and the Lord to have that altar moment, to have that time of just being in his presence. And I love that. I see people that come into our sanctuary and they get right to an altar, to the altar, they pray, they seek the Lord. Someone comes right in and right in front of me as the service is beginning. I think that's a beautiful practice, but we don't have to wait to get to church to be about that. We got to do that daily. And as we come out of that, man, the Lord does so much in our lives.
That's it. That's great.
Awesome, man. Hey, this was fun.
This was.
Let's do it again.
Yeah,
Next
indeed.
time? Next week?
Next week.
All right,
Sounds
man.
good.
Have a good week.
You too.